this afternoon's conference, which is the conclusive conference of the 3-day event of Made in Steel. This is an important first time. For the first time, Made in Steel hosts the presentation of Bilanci d'Acciaio, the survey which has been carried out for 13 editions. Thousands of national and international steel companies present, therefore, their balance sheet figures. Lucio, you'll be here this afternoon to chair a roundtable, which will be preceded by the presentation of some crucial numbers for 2020-2021. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you for the introduction this afternoon. This is our last day. This is the last session of this 2021 Made in Steel event. The numbers, the data, because after the vision, the emotions, the reaction, after the wish to plan for the future, we have to use the numbers, the data, which always help us to understand where we stand and find a direction. As you rightly pointed out, the 2021 edition of Bilanci d'Acciaio, which is the important autumn event of siderweb, we've decided to do this in advance because this is the very best venue to give visibility and strength to our work. So this session will have an introduction by Professor Teodori and Professor Tosini. The first will comment upon the survey we've carried out with the support of BP Banca through our supply chain. Professor Tosini will analyze the numbers for 2021. Then there will be a roundtable with very important speakers. Let me remind you who they are. Franco Bernabé, the President of Acciaierie d'Italia, Antonio Gozzi, President of Duferco Italia Holding, Antonio Marcegaglia, President of the Gruppo Marcegaglia, Giuseppe Pasini, the President of Feralpi Holding SPA, and Stefano Rossetti, the Deputy General Manager of BPER Banca. What will you do? Well, I'll initially ask them to comment both the results of 2020 and above all the fresh data we've gathered, what is happening in 2021 and our perspective for 2022. So this is a top-level roundtable to conclude a very high-level event. And after the roundtable, we won't have finished. No, there'll still be something after that because there will be the official awarding of some important medals for Italy's steel industry. The steel medal Federico Giolitti by AIM, the Italian Association of Metalworking, and the stainless steel medal Gabriele Di Caprio, always by AIM and Centro Inox. I'm very happy to welcome our AIM and Centro Inox friends who've decided to award these medals. Someone from the carbon steel world and one from the stainless steel world. It's an honor to have AIM and Centro Inox here with us. They are two very important links of our supply chain and of our community. So to have them here today is a real pleasure. Very well, I think we've said it all. What awaits us is clear. Let us now give the floor to the next guests and see you later with the greetings and with the final results of Bilanci d'Acciaio and for the end of Made in Steel. Thank you very much.
come sta andando questa fiera?
No, il secondo giorno va abbastanza. Oggi aspettiamo la maggior parte dei clienti, ieri poi all'inizio, però c'è abbastanza movimento, molto interessante.
Quindi segnali di ripresa incoraggianti dopo un tanto lockdown.
Sì, diciamo, i segnali c'erano già da un paio di mesi sul settore acciaio, almeno sul nostro, e anzi pensiamo che stia per raggiungere il peak, il top. Pensiamo che si sta un po' anche calmando, però sempre a un alto livello. Dobbiamo vedere come si sviluppa il prezzo del rottame e gli altri costi. Ci dà un po' anche, diciamo, certi pensieri, però siamo molto confidenti che può continuare bene.
Siamo fiduciosi che oggi, che di solito il giorno in mezzo è quello un po' più denso di appuntamenti, di incontri, le cose migliorino, ecco.
E questo 2021 come sta andando per voi?
Ma direi decisamente bene.
Un 2020 possiamo immaginare difficile per tutti, anche per la vostra azienda.
Meno prospettico a livello di soddisfazione, però abbiamo recuperato bene con il 2021.
Ottima impressione, era ora che ci si ritrovasse tutti insieme, tutti noi della filiera, e speriamo che sia di buon auspicio per il prossimo periodo che ci aspetta.
Per l'azienda Delna quest'anno sta andando bene, è stato un bell'anno, un po' come tutti nel settore siderurgico. Siamo usciti da un anno difficile dell'economia mondiale, un anno di pandemia, adesso poco per volta ci riprendiamo e speriamo di andare sempre meglio, soprattutto per l'economia italiana, che è un paese un po' massacrato.
Questa fiera rappresenta per tutti il momento di ritornare in presenza, ritornare a riallacciare rapporti anche umani che sono importanti.
Sì. Appunto, con questa fiera è l'inizio di rincontrarci, rapporti umani riallacciati, e speriamo che poco per volta sia solo più un brutto ricordo.
Fiera vivace, devo dire che chi è presente è abbastanza entusiasta, vediamo delle visite, anche perché è un momento di ripartenza per il paese, per l'economia, e il mondo dell'acciaio è sostanzialmente ha un sentiment positivo. Direi che tutto sommato ne è valsa la pena.
Diciamo che il 2020 non solo per noi ma per tutta l'Italia è stato un colpo, dato che per quello che si sta diffondendo, che speriamo finisca presto il Covid, però speriamo in una ripartenza quadruplicata.
Che cosa vi sembra, ecco, questa ripartenza in Fiera a Milano per Made in Steel?
Ma sembra ben organizzata e magari il primo passo per ritornare un po' alla normalità di tutti i giorni, ovviamente.
Sensazioni di questo 2021 dal tuo punto di vista?
Ma noi andiamo bene, speriamo che si continui così, ma credo che ormai è ripartita l'azienda, tutto il settore è ripartito.
Aspettative alte, no, mi spero di fare due chiacchiere, incontrare un po' di gente nel settore e approfondire conoscenze e scambiare opinioni, ecco, sul mondo.
Di cosa si occupa nello specifico?
Tubi e barre cromate, quindi vendita, commercio all'ingrosso di tubi e barre cromate principalmente.
Questo 2021 come sta andando?
È altalenante, però bene, positivi, guardiamo con fiducia il 2022.
Sta andando molto bene, oltre le aspettative. Pensavamo sinceramente a un qualcosa di più ridimensionato, visto i momenti, e invece siamo rimasti colpiti dall'affluenza e dall'interesse di chi viene a visitarci. È sicuramente un'ottima esperienza, un grande risultato.
E il momento che state vivendo nel 2021 è positivo?
Positivo sia dal punto di vista del fatturato che del tonnellaggio delle vendite.
No, è un'esperienza molto positiva. Dopo 2 anni di calma piatta iniziamo a poter rincontrare i clienti, i fornitori, quindi assolutamente quest'anno una cosa molto positiva. Sono venuto ieri e sono rimasto stupito dall'affluenza, tantissime persone, ed era una cosa che non mi aspettavo, pensavo che fosse una cosa molto più di nicchia quest'anno, invece devo dire che gli organizzatori devono essere soddisfatti.
Siamo appena arrivati e veniamo quasi sempre, lo troviamo sempre molto interessante per tutto il settore dell'acciaio, del tondo, noi siamo presogomatori e sempre troviamo qualche spunto per nuove nuove iniziative, nuovi progetti.
È ciò che è mancato nell'ultimo anno e mezzo, il contatto diretto, il fatto di fare affari de viso è assolutamente importante.
Già nella giornata di ieri si è notato del movimento e oggi sarà la giornata clou, effettivamente è la giornata centrale, quindi il movimento è aumentato, positivi riscontri già fin da ieri, appuntamenti fissati, c'è anche una voglia di ritorno ad una vita normale e a una situazione anche lavorativa e di incontri industriali che fanno parte delle normali attività, quindi il ritorno alla normalità è estremamente positivo.
Dopo 2 anni in cui eravamo tutti rinchiusi, perlomeno è la prima occasione per essere ancora tutti insieme, ecco, e ricominciare a parlare di acciaio.
È lo specchio di un 2021 che è in ripresa su tutti i fronti.
Sì, sicuramente su tutti i fronti, materie prime, acciaio, tutto, si sta lavorando bene. Anche per l'anno prossimo le previsioni sono buone.
È sempre un piacere partecipare, è stato posticipato per via del Covid, nonostante tutto vedo che comunque c'è un po' di partecipazione, speriamo che sia proficua.
Vediamo infatti tanto movimento, tanti contatti che sono stati riallacciati, era importante ritrovare anche la presenza.
Era giusto ripartire ed è importante, un'occasione importante per riallacciare rapporti che si erano un po' magari interrotti o comunque dilatati, per cui è un piacere essere qui.
Ma sicuramente è la prima fiera dopo il Covid, è un motivo per rincontrarsi, è una speranza che ricominci tutto alla normalità, un segnale positivo.
Sta andando abbastanza bene, no? Vista la situazione, io sono spagnola, seguo il mercato spagnolo per l'ABS e ieri aspettavamo una giornata tranquilla, no? Perché era la prima giornata e un po' in attesa di vedere cosa succedeva, però c'è stata un po' di gente, allora molto positivo.
Abbiamo avuto parecchi problemi, soprattutto per l'acquisto della lamiera.
Però siete qui, quindi credete anche al modello fiera, ai contatti diretti?
Sì, in passato siamo già stati e abbiamo trovato dei fornitori, ora siamo venuti per contattare, per incontrarci con i nuovi fornitori dopo questo periodo di fermo di 2 anni e vedere se si riesce a trovare qualche altra opzione.
Siete appena arrivati o è...
Appena arrivati, sembra che ci sia abbastanza gente, ma è il primo giorno, siamo entrati da mezz'ora.
Aspettative alte?
Immagino, curiosità più che altro, dato quello che è successo, quindi sembra che si stia muovendo un po' di gente, abbiamo un po' di appuntamenti.
Sta andando, secondo le nostre più rosee previsioni, sta andando bene, l'affluenza di ieri è stata positiva, ci sono stati parecchi visitatori che non ci aspettavamo, per cui molto bene. Speriamo che anche oggi si raddoppino i visitatori. Mancheranno un po' la quota stranieri, come si suol dire, ma abbiamo ben compensato con gli italiani, quindi direi molto bene.
E per il vostro gruppo il 2021 come sta andando?
Sta andando bene, direi che nel caos di questi incrementi prezzi, materie prime che mancano e quant'altro sta andando abbastanza bene, per cui direi positivi anche in questo. Speriamo che non venga a mancare quella domanda, perché è la cosa più importante che ci serve.
Siamo soddisfatti, diciamo che il fatto che ci siano anche in contemporanea più esposizioni, più fiere dà comunque un valore aggiunto, l'afflusso di gente ci sembra buono, considerando anche il periodo storico che stiamo affrontando, e quindi siamo complessivamente molto soddisfatti, felici di esserci e felici di aver potuto ricominciare insieme a Made in Steel.
Io sono arrivato qui oggi e devo dire che comunque c'è un po' di movimento. È una fiera che è la seconda volta che noi partecipiamo, siamo tra virgolette abbastanza nuovi, siamo anche un po' atipici rispetto a quello che è il settore che viene esposto, però devo dire che comunque anche la scorsa edizione un po' di contatti li abbiamo avuti sia con clienti nuovi e con anche gente che conosciamo, quindi per rinforzare un po' le relazioni, no? Quindi è un'esperienza positiva alla fine.
per Banca. Da più di 150 anni parliamo la lingua dei nostri clienti.
Buongiorno Ada, come andiamo?
Tiriamo avanti.
Dai, ti imbota, va là!
B per Banane e Lamponi, l'ortofrutta che Bianca ha rinnovato con il nostro aiuto.
E consegno anche a domicilio.
B per Batter d'Occhio, il tempo che Bruno ci mette a inviare denaro da quando usa l'app.
Quel basame lì le minga.
B per Bel Paese, da Torino a Brescia, da Arezzo a Cosenza. Perché paese che vai, B per Banca che trovi.
Good afternoon. Please take your seats. Our afternoon will be extremely interesting, but at the same time, it will be kind of challenging. So, Carlo. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for taking part so numerously in our meeting this afternoon, and thank you for those who are following our meeting via our YouTube channel by Maiden Still. Thank you very much for being with us. That's a very first experiment that we are making this year, so thank you for being with us. Thank you for joining us online. This is the last meeting of this extraordinary and visionary 2021 edition of Maiden Still. Welcome to Bilanci d'Acciaio. Once we got together with the entire siderweb team to prepare the contents of this very last part of the meeting, we said, well, we must illustrate Bilanci d'Acciaio. And as you know, this is the most important event at siderweb in the autumn period. This year, we carried out a survey activity with the support of the bank BPER, and this survey allows us to draw some conclusions as regards the current market situation and future trends. Since the very beginning, you showed that you appreciated very much this initiative, and it helped us to gather a lot of important pieces of information. So this 3-day event now draws to a close with the presentation of Bilanci d'Acciaio. It was a very important event, and now we would like to introduce some facts and figures. Figures are always very important. They pave the way, they shine a light on our future. So we're here to talk about the 2020 financial statement, and we'll also make some predictions as regards the next financial years. Historically, we have always been supported by COFAS and Regesta. And as of this year, we have BPER Banca supporting us, and we are very happy with that. So I have to tell you something about our 3 sponsors, because we at siderweb are able to provide reliable and high-quality content because we have the support of many companies and of many friends. Regesta has been part of the digital transformation of the steel sector and has been operating in the SAP service solutions for 20 years now. COFAS is, as you well know, one of the leading company as regards credit facilities. It has more than 75 years of experience, and it can rely on a worldwide sound network of subsidiaries. And then BPER Banca, which you already certainly know. This is a new friend for us at siderweb. It has local offices throughout the Italian country, and it has been supporting siderweb and the steel industry, especially in the northern part of Italy, which is where our industry is present. Let's officially kick off this afternoon's session. In a minute, I will give Emanuele Morandi the floor for some introductory remarks. In all our meetings where we illustrate Bilanci d'Acciaio, we all had introductory remarks made by Emanuele Morandi, and this must be the case in this edition as well. And then we will have Gianfranco Tosini, whom you already know, as a keynote speaker, and then Claudio Teodorio, University of Brescia, will give us an analysis analysis of the results of the survey. And then you see 5 chairs behind me. So 5 chairs for 5 very important panelists for our round table. We have Franco Barnabé with us, chairman of Acciaierie d'Italia, and then Antonio Gozzi, chairman of the Duferco Italia Holding, Antonio Marcegaglia, chairman of the Marcegaglia Group, Giuseppe Pasini, chairman of the Ferralpi Holding SPA, and Stefano Rossetti, which is Vice Director General of BPER Banca. Thank you for being with us today. Before I give the floor to Chairman Morandi, I just would like to point out that today is a good opportunity to, again, draw the conclusions of this 3-day event. And we will ask our friends of the Italian Association for the Steel Industry, AIM, awarding the steel medal and the stainless steel medal. So the Federico Giolitti Steel Medal will be awarded, and after that the Stainless Steel Medal, entitled to Gabriele Di Caprio, will also be awarded today, both by the Centro Inox and by the Italian Steel Making Association. That's it for me, and now I would like to give the floor to Emanuele Morandi. Thank you very much, Lucio. Mine will just be a very quick introductory comment. For the first time, Bilanci d'Acciaio is part and parcel of Made in Steel. And so basically we have Made in Steel and Bilanci d'Acciaio perfectly going hand in hand this year. Today we talked about sustainability, and this is a very important topic. This reminds me of a joke. In the past, I used to say that companies that don't make profits are not really very useful, and this is a word pun in Italy, being useful and profitable, the same word in Italian. So now we have a broader view, an all-encompassing view, and so we have changed our tack in analyzing financial statements. On the one hand, we have to have a very detailed approach when we look at our figures and the financial statements, but at the same time, we have to look very far into the future in order to make predictions. And today, with Bilanci d'Acciaio, which has almost become a self-sustained brand, gives us the opportunity to analyze 5,000 financial statements in a very strategic way. And it gives us a compass, if you wish, to look at the future and to interpret future trends. So we're really very proud of Bilanci d'Acciaio. So thank you for taking part in this survey, and I wish you all the best for the rest of the meeting. Thank you very much, Chairman Morandi. Now I would like to ask Gianfranco Tozzini to join me on the podium for his presentation. Gianfranco, you now have the floor. First of all, thank you very much for being with us today. My speaking time is limited, so I will have to be very fast in my presentation. I will focus my report on 2 aspects. First of all, I will be analyzing the performance of the steel industry companies, about 160 companies over a period of 2 years, and then I will be focusing on the steel industry at large. Let me start with the first topic. As you well know, in 2020, this is a year where the pandemic hit, and this had an impact on the steelmaking industry asymmetrically worldwide. Why? That's because the pandemic hit within a different time frame the world over. The impact was different. In some countries, the impact was immediately felt. In other countries, it was felt at a later stage. And as a result of that, the consequences brought by the pandemic are different the world over. There are some still companies that have been less damaged by the pandemic than others. Having said that, let me turn to my first slide. In this graph, in this table, you have a summary of what happened at worldwide level. 160 steel making groups of companies were analyzed. I've broken them down according to the geographical area. Here in the first column you see the revenue trends. So there are some areas, for instance China, that had a very small impact. So I analyzed 20 different steel-making company groups, and basically their revenues, their turnover remained the same. As regards the EBIT and revenue ratio, as you can see, it settled at the same level as in 2019. So their profitability has just decreased a little bit, and their debt level has decreased. So basically, for China, in the period between 2019 and 2020, China made it possible to fully close the gap it had vis-à-vis other countries. The European Union is the one that is struggling the most. Revenue decrease minus 10%, and what is even worse is the impact all that had on margins and profits, minus 3.1%. But the industrial profitability was already close to zero in the previous year, in 2019. Over the last 5 years, the average profitability of this industrial group has been ranging between 2 and 5%. And a question immediately springs to our mind. This is certainly the area where the largest investments have to be made, given the restrictions that the European Union has posed in order to tackle the green transition. So with this very small profitability, then you cannot go anywhere. So unless we have necessary resources, it will be impossible for this industry to meet the green transition commitments. So we need to see a profitability increase, which is at least twice as much what we have experienced over the last 5 years. Then there are the CIS, so the independent state, and as you can see, they have experienced a sensitive reduction in the profitability, and there's been an increase here in general of turnover. So these are values we can only dream of. Why is that? Well, you can easily understand their business model is completely different. So they have a completely different business model, and the extraction of minerals, the collection of minerals, all these systems are carried out in a completely different way in the CIS countries, in the Confederation of Independent Countries. All right. So what happened in Europe then? Here you see a very clear picture, and you see the positioning of the main steel-making groups in Italy compared with other European countries. Italian groups have managed to weather the storm in a better way vis-à-vis other European groups. And you can see that if you have a look at the decrease in the turnover, minus 13% in one case, minus 17% in the other case, as opposed to minus 20% in the other European countries. And the profitability was preserved, while other European countries recorded figures around minus 3%. So basically, we are in a better position vis-à-vis other European countries. Why is that? There are several reasons for that. First of all, flexibility. The flexibility of our structure has helped us. Our Italian groups managed to better adjust to a new cycle if compared to other European steel company groups. Here you see a breakdown of Italian groups, the former Ilva Steelworks. If you include the Ilva, then of course the performance levels of Italian steel groups will certainly diminish a lot. If you exclude it, then of course things change. So that's why I provided the two options: Italy, including and excluding the former Ilva Steelworks. We will certainly see what happens in the next few years, and we are in a better position than other steel manufacturing companies in the rest of Europe. Right, so what happened from an operational and structural point of view in 2020? If we consider the turnover, added value, and invested capital, so three structural values, this is the picture you are faced with. Invested capital, as you can see here, there's been an increase, while for the other two factors there's been a decrease. It goes without saying. In 2020, as under Law Decree 204, which allowed us to post investments and credits in a different way, we had again several positive effects on the balance sheet, and an increase of invested capital and an increase of assets and equity. The impact of these choices will then be seen as of the 2021 balance sheet, where we will see how this plays out. If we now have a look at the net and profitability, you will immediately see that the results are completely different here. The sector that has been most heavily hit here is the sector of producers. Distributors have been less hit by the pandemic, and then we have the whole scrap sector, which is basically the source of raw materials for us, and the sheet working sector was again less impacted. Let's now consider the last 3-year period. Here, producers and manufacturers were heavily hit in terms of profitability, and they had already started struggling the year before. The highest EBITDA decrease took place in 2019 first, and then in 2020 as well, but they had to bear the brunt of this decrease in the year before. In the other sectors, there was of course a decrease, but it was not as deep as for the manufacturers, as for the producers. So when we consider this graph, we have to say that producers were those who were most heavily hit. So we can expect now better results for producers than for all the other sectors, now that the recovery is picking up again. Now, turning to net profitability, here we see that producers posted the first negative results, and this is a 2-year period where the ROE is almost equal to zero for everybody. For all the other sectors, we see a decrease, but the situation is still sustainable, especially when it comes to the scrap sector and to the metal sheet working sector. Then we have financial expenses and the financial expenses and the BDA ratio. As you can see, there has been a steep increase for manufacturers, and this is only evident in absolute terms. Passive interest rates have been very stable over the last 3 years, and the net operating margin has been illustrating all that. So financial expenses have been kept to a minimum thanks to this mechanism. Then we have debt level according to the different sectors within our industry. The debt level has been going down for almost everybody, and here you see the ratio between your debt and your assets. Since the value of assets has been going down, so this decrease in the debt level is due to a decrease in the assets. So the assets has been, of course, changing, and this has determined then a change in the debt level in turn. The debt level is sustainable. Maybe service centers are struggling a bit more than others, but again, we are not here in a difficult situation. Let me now turn to a further index, which is the hedging of fixed assets over a 3-year period. Own funds are used here, which is, of course, the best option. There was a decrease for a period of 2 years, and here again, we see that the revaluation of assets has determined an increase in fixed assets, and this has not been offset completely by a revaluation of assets in general and of equity in general. Let me now turn to trading and distribution. If we consider the overall value of the sector, we will see that producers have lost about 3 points in terms of their overall value. It means that other sectors down the road have recovered 1 point each. If we now see the final destination of this added value for companies, we then find out that the sector within this industry that has derived the largest benefits is the staff sector, the HR sector. So it's about the payment of salaries in general, which has gone up over the years. And then we have write-offs and amortization schemes, then external funds. Here we see there's been an increase from 10 to 12 percentage points. And then 2 stakeholders have been bearing the brunt of that. On one hand, the state, the government, and then the shareholders. So the government went from 6.8% to 0.1%, and shareholders from 17 to 4.8%. So basically, the pandemic has engendered a new distribution of value within the sector, within the industry. Let me now turn to the users, and if we consider the ROCE, which is an indicator for industrial marginality or profitability, here we see that this value settled at 5%, and there are 2 sectors which we need to take into consideration. First, the automotive sector, which is the which is the second best customer, so to speak, for our industry, and the EBITDA is minus 3.4%. We have to be very careful here because this is a very risky sector. And then we have another sector which was considered to be very critical up until yesterday, which is the building sector. And here we have plus 20% industrial profitability. So this is a sector that is now out of the woods in terms of the financial crisis. And then if you now consider the ROE, this is 77%, and here we see the effects of an under capitalization. If we see the debt level coefficient, then we see that the value is hovering around 4, which is kind of critical as a value. So to understand what will happen in this sector, we then need to wait and see and wait what is going to happen in the next few years. For sure, the positioning will be improving in the next few years. If you have a look at the investments that are going to be made in the future, then of course the building sector is going to be the one with the largest investment. So we will certainly see a decrease in the debt level. So in a nutshell, these are the results of the 2020 financial statements. As you can see, we have a very different picture. We have industrial groups that are weathering the storm and experiencing a lot of difficulties, and there we also have some of the main European groups. And then we have some other company groups that are reinforcing their position. They're starting from a better position, and we will now have to rush just to make sure that we fill the gap between us and them. So in the next 2 years, we will certainly see that the building sector will certainly close this gap. Thank you very much, Gianfranco.
It's always a bit scary to descend these steps. Thank you for your punctuality. Professor Teodori, thank you for your presentation. I'm under the impression that for the future, we haven't closed a 2020, which is so brilliant. It was complicated, but we managed to make it. If I can summarize, I think you always summarize very well. Good afternoon, everyone. Together with you, we will see the results of the survey to which roughly 100 companies have replied. Specifically, let me highlight the main results. There's 2021, which is about to close, and the results are satisfactory. Instead, in 2022, the level of perception, the level of confidence appears to be slightly lower. Let's just try to understand together which are the main causes for this dynamic. The sample represents all the different stages of the supply chain, both in terms of size, but also in kinds of activity. Just to give you a couple of numbers, 33% of the respondents have more than 100 million in turnover, and half of these have more than 50 employees. But the overall distribution is adequate. 7 points, bullet points. Number one, turnover trends. We've just concluded our analysis of 2020. We see the results were not fully satisfactory. But let us look at 2021, 2022. Obviously, 2021 is a year in which results are extremely positive. More than 90% of companies declares that they're increasing their turnover, and this could not be otherwise. Obviously, 1/3 of these companies increases this by more than 50%, and then the others with slightly lower percentages. However, in 2022, we observe that the sample divides into 3 parts, nearly equal in representation. So 27% foresee a new reduction of turnover, 37% only foresee an increase of their turnover. This is a first indicator. which shows that uncertainty has not been completely overcome by the companies. And also in terms of geographical distribution of the turnover, we don't really see differences in the last 3 years because it's obvious it's very difficult to change the geographical mix of the turnover. And you can see that even if 1/4 of the companies declare that they've modified this, the changes are really limited. And so Italy always plays the lion's share in terms of turnover. So next to turnover, we have economic results, the P&L, and so that's the most interesting point, and this for a simple reason. If you look at the net result in 2021, there's a significant improvement, 90% increase their net result. Net income, also because in the previous year there was a major decrease. 1/4 of the companies nearly doubles this, but in 2022 we see a substantial reduction of these expectations. Only 57% of the respondents declares that their net income will increase, whereas around 39% foresee a drop. And so this is another signal not to be overlooked. But what concerns us most is the EBITDA. In the previous presentation, we see that the values are not particularly high, and this also in the light of the trends of certain costs, so from raw materials to energy. There's a perception of further worsening. And if we look at this, roughly 60% of respondents have an EBITDA lower by 10%. And in 2022, the situation does not improve. So this is a point we should ponder, even in the light of what we will see in a short while. Next to economic results, there's the financial side of the business. I'll run through this quickly. We see that 31% of companies have asked for further resources, and most of these were devoted to working capital. This is obvious when you want to grow, and a significant part to investments, and we'll come back to this in greater detail later. Where did these resources come from? Well, mainly from the banking world, without considering alternative financial instruments which can involve the banking world, but which are different in terms of structure and composition. And so clearly companies have benefited wherever they could from the new support laws with subsidies, but others have moved independently. When you see two columns, that of the second column, how many companies have indicated this variable? Because in such questions there could be more answers. And then the first column on the right is just the total. But the difference between the two is the same in all the answers. So you have a clear prevalence of banking funding. And then you see that to grow, the mix must be slightly different. Then some strategic aspects. The first concerns investment policy. And here, in this pie chart, we see that the world has changed compared to 2020. In 2020, many companies were blocked. Their investment budgets have been postponed. So those companies which blocked their investments, look, this is just 5%, whereas 77% kept this stable compared to the forecasts from the beginning of the year, and some have increased. Those who have increased are companies which do better, but have more of a medium-term view and try to take advantage from taxation benefits, because the taxation benefits at the moment are particularly interesting. So where was this money invested? The areas are the same. So we see on the one hand that there is the need to intervene on the existing capital, so the need to renew and replace activities. On the other hand, there is a need to make technological developments, to carry out technological developments. The two are very much linked because when you have to invest to renew or to replace what you have, you try to improve technologically speaking too. In 2022, there's a slight change because the two main areas are investments in new technologies, but also in digitalization. Because it's obvious that when you read the recovery plan, digitalization is everywhere. And so in the answers, one tends to go in this direction. Moreover, the investment in renewal and replacement maintains a percentage which is rather high. I introduced the concept of the Italian recovery plan. It's interesting to understand to what extent companies perceive this. Then I realized that you have a cross design which results from this. It wasn't my intention, but the green part, this 58%, says that it's satisfactory or highly satisfactory, and I'm speaking of the recovery plan for their own supply chain. On this answer, I'm a little nonplussed because the recovery plan is a strategic plan. Yesterday, listening to the Federacciai general meeting, there is no general plan for the steel industry. The fact that there is no plan when 1 year has already gone by since the recovery plan was drawn up is indeed something we should think about carefully. And the companies in the lower part of the graph indicate this as the area where they're a little uncertain as to the real benefits this can lead to. It's obvious that you can have a major potential, but it's one thing to have a potential, and then it's another thing to have things in practice for the various companies. We mustn't overlook the effect on some areas which actually use this. We've spoken of automotive. That's certainly an important industry. But briefly speaking, I don't think that it really concentrated on the recovery plan really concentrated on the national supply chains, but those which have a supply chain not in Italy but abroad. And let's think of the airspace industry. Or the world linked to the photovoltaic industry. We should think about this too. In any case, apart from the recovery plan, but not totally isolated from this, which are the main operations? First of all, the supply chain agreements or cooperation agreements. These should be promoted always. Yesterday, during the general meeting, I heard that when the situation is negative, people join forces. When things go well, they don't. Whereas when things go well, we should do this because you can grow, you can develop. So on the one hand, cooperation agreements, the opening up to networks, the companies joining forces within the supply chain, these are recurrent themes. But then we also have the reorganization of plants as an important element in order to be more efficient and adapt to new standards. And we have seen this as part of the investment process. It's obvious that in Italy, for ecological transition, we heard yesterday that steel in Italy has been doing a lot of things for many years now. Well, all these elements should influence the new business of companies, the way in which they work, the way in which they do business, the organizational choices, the strategic choices to be made, the structural choices taken. When there's a situation of crisis, the business models must change because if they remain unvaried, the crises are not solved. What emerges? Which are the main changes which companies want to introduce? So on the one hand, the greater weight given to digitalization, greater importance. We've heard this, and investments confirm this. A greater operational flexibility. It's obvious. There's discontinuity in our world for a few years now, and therefore it must be as flexible as possible. Otherwise, you just cannot respond to the very quick elements. For discontinuity to be followed, you need discontinuity. And then supply agreements. This is important when there are crises for raw materials. This is not an Italian problem. It's a European problem. This emerged clearly from the discussions I heard. And then what really struck me, the second last line, the importance given to products with a greater added value. This is like something apart from the business model, but given the low added value, I think that this is a topic which instead deserves our attention, more attention. People always say that Italian companies, apart from a limited number of these, are small compared to their world and European partners. When you ask companies what they think about this, 1/3 of these believe that it's not a real problem. The size of the company is not important. Others instead say, yes, perhaps we should grow. But how? Once again, through agreements between companies, a strengthening of supply chain relations. People always go back to the same point. The word supply chain is always evoked, but then there's no real follow-up to this agreement in principle. But once again, if I want to reach an agreement, I want to do acquisitions and become larger, I can't think I do this necessarily only by contracting debt. You can also open up to the capital market and venture capital, and not just funding. But this appears to be of marginal importance. I was happy to see that the perception of Italian companies in the international framework is positive. And I'm convinced that this is true, especially in terms of some strategic choices, amongst which the environmental ones. And so the international importance of Italian companies is considered to be high. 10% says no, but in all families we have people who are pessimists by principle and always reply no. Uncertainty. The uncertainty which exists generates risks. If we look at which are the worst risks perceived by companies, in this table 1 is low risk, 5 is high risk profile, and the highest risk is in the operational dimension. Raw materials, both in terms of availability, but also in terms of costs. And we'll see this later. Transport costs and logistic costs are another element. And operational risk is what is perceived as most risky for companies. Then there's the financial aspect, and thirdly, the environmental risk. But not so much as a risk of damaging the environment, but above all, the risk that those who have to adapt, especially those outside of Italy, won't do this. And so we have a different playing field and a different competitive profile. Number 4 worried me, the organizational dimension. You see that nearly 50% says that there's the second last. That's a generational continuity. I wasn't expecting this. I was convinced that the passing of the company from generation to generation had already been managed and understood, something the companies had already invested in. Instead, respondents reply no. Then there are other risks, but these are less relevant, so we can just skip through these. Speaking of raw materials, for raw materials, there are 2 points to be made. The first is the impact. What impact did these have? A rather important impact. If we look at 42% of companies, these had an impact of raw materials above 50%. I'm speaking of impact on costs, of course. 37% between 30 and 50%. So this is a very strong impact, very significant. It's obvious that then we have to speak of scrap in the medium term, but perhaps we can speak of this in another moment. And how is this increase perceived? Is it going to be structural? Is it going to be temporary? You see that the majority of companies reply that either it's going to be structural, and at that point it will be in 2022, or if it's perceived as temporary in terms of dimension, part of this increase will be perceived in the future too. This is for raw materials. I don't know if it is true for transport too. Freight rates have increased, and you know that there's a concentration of supply in freights, and we know that the impact on cost is significant. The last point concerns sustainability. This is another aspect. Much is being said about, but little is being done in terms of communication. Perhaps we do much in terms of choices within a company. Sustainability, ecological passing on of things, and decarbonization. These are all things which are important and have an impact on choices. So we do a lot, companies do a lot, but then if you ask them, draw up a sustainability balance sheet, forget the name you give for this, but if you try to do something for sustainability, well, 80% says no. Well, you wonder what's going to happen in the future. Well, 61% of those who say I haven't done anything say I will not do anything on this topic. And so I think that it's important to work on this and really think about this carefully. Social work, green investments, to improve your banking rating or a rating vis-a-vis investors, because this is one of the criteria used to assess a company and to look to the future. So there are a lot of different elements you can discuss and reason about. So this takes me to my conclusions. Just very rapidly, what has emerged? So certainly a significant answer at a country level exists. Italy is growing, but we mustn't forget that it has a 20-year lag to recover, during which it didn't grow that much. There's much to be done. The confidence vis-a-vis 2021 is there. For 2022, it has been slightly reduced. So we have to work on the confidence of entrepreneurs, because we can say what we want, but then choices are made on the basis of the perceived confidence and not what you say. This is important. Economic results are not particularly satisfactory in terms of outlook, but we have time to change this. There's a frequent recall to the concept of supply chain, which I hope will be truly reinforced. An open comment on the size of companies. I believe that companies can grow, not necessarily becoming larger, but reaching some robust agreements amongst themselves. This is a way of growing vis-a-vis third parties and not individually. And there's an excitement as to investment processes which will change in time. Some will have to adapt. Business models head towards digitalization and operational flexibility on the other. And in terms of risks, there's a prevalence of operational risk taking. So, in other words, this requires answers and not waiting. If you wait, this doesn't reduce uncertainty. It complicates life. So we need new projects. I've always seen entrepreneurs full of hope. So I'd like to conclude with a beautiful sentence. It's not mine, but even if fear will have an increasing number of points in favor, you must choose hope. And Klimt painted this lovely picture to represent this quotation. I'm sure you will represent this hope. Thank you. Thank you, Claudio Teodori. Thank you so much. You've given us so much food for thought. I don't know where to start off from, but it's not my task. So at this point, I invite the panel members, President Franco Bernabé from Acciaierie d'Italia, Antonio Gozzi, Chairman of Duferco Italian Holding, Antonio Marcegaglia, Chairman of the Marcegaglia Group, Giuseppe Pasini, Chairman of the Feralpi Holding Group, and Stefano Rossetti, Deputy General Manager of BPER Banca. As I was saying, I really don't know where to start off from, because the ideas, the points put across the accounts for 2020 and the survey carried out amongst companies for 2021 with the outlook for 2022 are truly many. I'd like to follow this order. No, don't drink water at the moment. You have to start speaking immediately. I'm not going to ask you a direct question. Let's just ask you, what do you believe after having heard the results of this survey, this analysis? Do you agree with what's been said, President Pasini? Thank you. Yes, for some things I agree, for others perhaps I have some different ideas. I agree on the fact that this year around 50% of those interviewed said that the increase in turnover will be above 50%. And the first 7 to 8 months show that this is true. I also agree on the fact that the investment policy is very much based on the renewal and replacement of production processes, where many investments will be made in technology innovation like digitalization. I would have expected something more in terms of investments in training, which Professor Theodori did not mention. So I believe that training, understood as human capital, is one of the most important and decisive investments to be carried out. And I believe that our companies have the duty to place this amongst their investment priorities. I looked at the survey carefully and I didn't find a specific item on training. Speaking of ecological transition, 68% of the recovery plan indicates very clearly that they have confidence. So there's a very high percentage of entrepreneurs who believe in the promises of this government. Let us bear in mind that confidence and trust in the decisions of entrepreneurs are those things which lead you to making a strategic investments. If there is no confidence, it's not always that simple. So when you have confidence, you're also you feel more supported. And from this point of view, we're now in a stage when this government is giving us a reason for confidence. Yesterday, during the general meeting, President Banzato asked some pointed question to the minister, but we did not receive really specific answers. That's his task, however. As for the limited size of Italian companies, it's not a question of size. It's important to find within your size challenging objectives. Raw materials, well, speaking of scrap, this is a structural trend in Italy. It's not a quota issue. We import roughly 1/3 of iron scrap. Within Federacciaio, we are discussing this topic in length and the D&I, and this is an issue we always have in mind at the back of our heads. Speaking of risk chapters, well, I'm not very convinced that the liquidity financial risk is that bad. The companies have shown us this during the pandemic. So when we had some important shutdowns, 3, 4, 5 weeks, I believe that our companies are well capitalized. The entire steel supply chain in the last few years has strengthened. And so I don't really see this as a problem. I do see a problem in terms of generational change, but it's not a problem for the steel industry. Allow me to say that this is a problem of all companies in all segments. I didn't quite agree instead when he spoke of sustainability, the last point made by Professor Teodori, where 61% of respondents do not intend to draw up a sustainability budget. I'm convinced that the opposite is true. Now sustainability is part of our priorities. Then whether you're not going to report what you do is another thing. But we are well aware that sustainability must be economic, environmental and social in nature is absolutely important and necessary to be able to grow and lead your company forward. In my opinion, associations must do a lot for this. And I'm saying this because after 4 years of being president in Confindustria Brescia, it's really difficult to get people, especially small and medium-sized companies, what it means to be sustainability, what it means to work in a supply chain. And I see that associations must absolutely work on this. This is a topic we can come back to.
Chairman Marcegaglia, of course, I'm asking the same question to you as well. Are there any elements that you see looking at the future that would somehow support this view? And there are two main themes, two main topics I'd like to refer to. Your group has been submitting the best results ever this year concerning financial statements, and then the topic of internationalization and the topic of size. So considering all these elements, it seems that according to the respondents to our survey, this is not a topic that is considered to be so important, but then with the benefit of hindsight, then size may matter. Yeah, I will try and keep my answer short so that we have then time to go for a second round of replies. Now, no matter what financial statement results we managed to secure this year, we just experienced a 2.7% reduction in our turnover. But other than that, I see that we are perfectly in line with this snapshot that has been taken by the survey. So why do I say that? Because we as entrepreneurs operating in the steel sector, we tend to be more cautious, we tend to be more modest than others, given then the final performance results that we get. So we still see a varied picture. Trust level goes up and down. Profitability is not high enough in order to take up future challenges. So it's a mixed picture. First, we need to bear in mind that 2020, so just 1.5 years ago, we were asking ourselves if our company would be able to weather the storm, if the problem of cash flow would have overthrown us or not. We were asking ourselves if the pandemic would have create dramatic consequences, and I also remember that we also came up with a worst-case scenario in the event of a second wave of the pandemic. So for most of the colleagues I exchanged views with, we all share that this year will help us to turn a corner. It will go down in history. So if we have managed to, again, weather the storm in a situation where we had a lot of uncertainties, then 2021 will be an exceptional year. And this is the consequence of a very positive financial situation worldwide. So we have overestimated the negative impact on the manufacturing sector. And of course, here we're not taking into consideration all the dramatic consequences at social level, of course. I'm not referring to that. But if we just consider the manufacturing sector, then we can say that the situation is less worse than we expected. So we had feared much worse consequences. As opposed to that, 2021 will be an extraordinary year. As opposed to our worst expectations, 2021 will be an extraordinary year. But then if we look at 2022, then we can say, well, we are in a good position if we look at the year 2022. So basically, if other companies that were doing well before the pandemic, if you ask them what do you foresee for the year 2022, then they will all tell me the same. And a BDA which is lower than 10% is low. Yes, that's true, it's low. But you have to consider that a 10% BDA is a good result if you are operating as a service center. If you are an integrated producer, then of course you would have to improve this figure. I'm not an expert in this field, but I think that we need to be able to say that we are now in a positive situation. So we have a lot of volatility. We have continuous changes in raw material prices. So it's a very uncertain scenario. And all this has proven how important it is to have management skills, to be flexible enough to react to situations swiftly. So this has enlightened how important it is to be able to manage a company. So I would like to add some color to this picture, and I would like to point out again all the skills, all the managerial skills behind this result. We were able again to derive full benefits from all the aspects such as low spread levels and higher margins. So the topic of internationalization and the topic of size, I think it's a bit overrated. Size can, in some segments, entail benefits. But there's something that is more important to that, this ability to be part of a global playing field, although you are maybe a small company, based on a regionalization and based on a new enhancement of the regional dimension. Thank you very much, Chairman Marcegaglia, Chairman Gozzi. Well, we, or you, I should say, because I mean we did the survey all together. Were we too shy, maybe? And then the second question. We discussed macro trends and all the main difficulties that have arisen. So my question for you is, this year and possibly the next year will be the years of the recovery. But what do you see if you look at the future? Now, thinking back also about your past experience. Good evening, everybody. Well, so we tend to close our financial statements at the end of September. So for me, the final results are already there. And so I can only express a positive judgment given the structural components of our industry, as Antonio Marcegaglia pointed out earlier on. And I'm not going back to that. I still believe that the Italian steel industry, and I'm referring to the manufacturing industry, is a good example. And it's a leading industry worldwide. So we are certainly unique in terms of flexibility. Flexibility is one of our tenets, it's one of the biggest strengths that we have. And if I make a comparison with this snapshot that we see here in Bilanci d'Acciaio, then I must admit that I do perfectly see a lot of uncertainty. And maybe we were all somehow under the influence of this spike in the energy prices. So we were exchanging views yesterday and we were asking ourselves, okay, what is happening right now? And so in general, we all have a positive feeling. We believe that this trend in worldwide economy, which has bounced back after the pandemic, will again be confirmed in the year 2022 as well. But then at the same time, we would just be blind if we didn't see any warming up effects that are part and parcel of this rebound. We talked about these crazy energy prices because they are crazy, yes. This is just crazy. But then there are also other elements that are propping up inflation rates. I'm thinking about interest rates, for instance. I'm thinking about geopolitical uncertainties. They are there, yeah. So I do understand that entrepreneurs are a bit cautious. I perfectly understand that, given the uncertain situation. So we are cautious, we are optimistic, and we are. Again, we stand ready. We absolutely stand ready to adjust to the situation, and we are just able to adapt very swiftly. Then you have the so-called cluster-driven effect, so data are adjusted accordingly, and maybe it would be worth splitting up data, and upstream and downstream data should be analyzed maybe separately. And then just a suggestion maybe for next year, you correctly pointed out sustainability-related communication, and if I've not misunderstood the breakdown, there's no separate item for sustainability investment. That, in my view, should be flagged out, because most of the investments that we are making as entrepreneurs are aiming at sustainability. So that should be pointed out. I do agree with you. The topic of sustainability and communication is of paramount importance. Mr. Giorgetti said that I'm quite obsessed with sustainability, half jokingly. That's how he said that, but still. So I'm coordinating a group of companies operating in the chemical, in the paper-making sector, in the foundry sectors, and ceramic production sector. So under the aegis of several groups, we are trying to find out what we have to do as companies in order to meet our sustainability goals by 2030. I don't agree with the judgment that has been issued as regards the Recovery and Resilience Plan. So there I don't really agree, especially when it comes to the former Ilva steelworks. So based on what is happening in other European countries, we have decided to foresee a fund that will be used to support the steel industry. We can't really make large investments that have to range between 20 and 15 million euros from now down to 2027 on our own. Thank you very much. So I have a very broad question for you. Do you agree with the picture that emerges out of this survey? And then another question is, we get some information about sustainability out of this survey, and we just take it for granted that our companies in our world, in our industry, make large investments in terms of sustainability. So the question that we are asking ourselves is, if you're making investments in terms of sustainability, are you communicating about them? Are you telling the world about this investment? And then the other thing which we overlooked, which has taken us aback, is energy. So we drafted the survey questions at the end of August, and as soon as we sent out the questionnaire, then the entire energy spike issue arose. So we have one question about that as well. So first of all, if you agree with the picture that we're getting out of the survey, and then second, the topic of energy, the energy price increase. Is this a financial crisis related, financial situation related price increase, or is there a structural element behind this energy price spike, which would certainly be critical for us because steel making entails a high or intensive use of energy. Thank you very much. I'm a newbie, so to speak, in the steel making sector, so I've had the opportunity to learn a lot of the last 2 days, and I'd just like to congratulate you upon organizing such an interesting conference. A company that had to deal with all the problems that we had last year, and that is now finding itself in such a positive situation this year, should then most probably have a different perception of itself. We have always had a very negative opinion of ourselves, and if you keep saying, well, things are not going well, and if you say that for 20 years, then you can't say all of a sudden that things have turned for the better, because nobody would believe you. So we have, as I said, weathered the storm. This 2020 was one of the most difficult years after the Second World War. This year we are experiencing and seeing a lot of very positive signals, and the economy and our government, they're all giving us very positive signals. Our Prime Minister, Mario Draghi, is now in a position where we can capitalize on what we have done. So there's no vax and Green Pass related debate. All these things are distracting us from the real problems that this country has and that we are taking care of with great determination and in a very brave way. Can't say much about the picture that emerges out of the survey. What I can certainly say is that I was taken aback by sustainability and all the sustainability-related information, because it kind of contradicts what we heard yesterday about a sustainability report we heard about yesterday. So on the one hand, we see small and medium companies having difficulties in illustrating what they're doing in terms of sustainability. And what we heard yesterday, so the sustainability report we heard about yesterday is absolutely at par, at the same level as the best that we could hear about. You were mentioning the issue of energy and energy prices. And these are problems, and these are problems that do not allow us to fully understand the strategic issues of our sector. So the topic of energy is precisely concerning this. Energy, as you know, is a very important aspect, and it has, of course, an influence on financial statements. Over the last few days, I haven't read any reasons why we are experiencing this phenomenon. So there are long-term and short-term reasons. So there has been a very strong increase in the demand from China in terms of cubic meters. The G&L demand has been soaring, and then throughout Asia we also had another 10 billion cubic meters of G&L that were demanded for. So we are talking about a very high amount of G&L cubic meters in excess of the previous year demand. And in England, several issues were raised, and in the rest of Europe, several problems were detected. And with the No Tree Law, we stopped producing Italian gas, and we would have had enough here with very competitive prices. So renewables were not particularly successful because we didn't have enough wind in the northern part of Italy. So we had a higher demand for resources, and we had a dip in the supply. And this was also the result of things that happened in the United States and in South America, where renewables went downhill. So again, this mix of prices, this mix of prices-related issues took place at the same time. But there are no real structural aspects. China here plays an important role. China, you can tell me, you can confirm that. China, and we saw it yesterday in the report presentation, China produces 1,100,000 tons of steel, so more than half of the steel produced worldwide. And it also produces, again, most of the and uses most of the steel resources worldwide. So over the last 40 years, China has been enacting a strategy which is now prone to a change. China has embarked on a decarbonization plan, and as our young friend Greta, while politicians are just making blah blah, just talking, politicians in China are kind of serious. And I was operating in the oil sector in China. I acted as a president in one of the main companies operating in the oil sector, and I was also involved in some of the projects that inaugurated some of the gas pipes transporting gas from Asia to the Western world. So when Xi Jinping says something, that is going to take place, and it is in line with an executive plan that is carried out by the Chinese government. And in general, there is a very well advanced execution plan. Xi Jinping said last year at the UN Assembly that China will embark on a decarbonization plan that will lead to carbon neutrality by 2060. So this year, then, at the UN Assembly, Xi Jinping pointed out that he has stopped the building of new carbon plants. and we have just heard that carbon plants are still working in China, but this new change refers to new plants to be built. So newly built carbon plants will not be become real, so that they will stop building new carbon plants. So they're now willing to have a cleaner environment, cleaner water. So China is the second world economy. So they wanted to enact a plan that has a very heavy impact in terms of decarbonization, in terms of usage of clean energies, and I have spent 20 years in the oil sector, and the elective green energy here, energy source, is gas. So replacing carbon with gas will entail a 70% reduction of CO2 emissions. So basically, when we hear that the problem has been tackled with an ideological strategy, then I must say that this is not completely wrong. The transition must be carried out. We need a transition because climate change-related issues are there. But in the energy industry, again, the transition has to take place, although this process is slow. So all that been possible with replacing carbon with gas. And then we also have hydrogen, which has now been propped up a lot, and we hear a lot about it in the mass media. And again, we will, of course, need a production of hydrogen at very competitive prices. And our Italian industry has a competitive edge in this regard, because from an industrial point of view, Italy has the production of catalytic converters, and it has extensive experience in this regard. So if we decide to move on with hydrogen, and we want to do so seriously, then of course we can certainly achieve industrial sustainability within a limited period of time. And then there's another sign which is very positive. Maybe we are now in a situation which we haven't been in for 30 years now. I'm thinking about the period after 1993, for instance. Since then, we have had only problems. And then in the year 2000, we stopped growing. Italy cannot afford itself to stop growing. We need to foster growth again. And we have, again, to do so under a very safe helm. We will certainly go back to the Recovery and Resilience Plan. My judgment, my take on that is completely different. We didn't have enough time to draft this plan adequately. Other countries had a different structure in place. They already had projects and plans ready, and our Prime Minister, Mario Draghi, didn't have that. So he had to make the most out of what was already there, what was already available. Okay, so maybe we can go back to the PNR at a later stage. Thank you.
Now, one of the things which emerges from the survey is the significant support in a complex year like 2020, and the propellant which the world of credit and finance can represent in this complex stage, in which we've seen the great will of carrying out investments. And I'll do a second round of answers on this topic From your point of view, Director General, you have a special observatory, and not just in the steel industry. What do you see? How do you see our world? Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation. Allow me to make some comments first on the survey, interesting surveys we've heard, and also on the environment. The environment this three-day event has created. I always say that steel is one of the fundamental pillars of manufacturing. We are the number 2 manufacturing country of the world, of Europe, and number 7 in the world. And so the atmosphere I feel here is the same I felt in the first half of the year. We knew this was going to be the record year for steel. We were saying this in May, June. I heard this being said in a very clear way. As early as May, June, yesterday, when President Morandi spoke of a magic moment, that's how he started. When President Banzato says that this year will be closed with a plus 6.1% compared to 2019, I believe that there should be an awareness that this atmosphere is that of an important year and of an important role for this industry. And then I'll go back to credit. But speaking of the surveys, I listened with great interest to what Professor Tosini had to say. 2 quick comments. COVID is more or less goes more or less hand in hand with the positive result of the various countries. China, which was the first country to overcome the COVID issue, or just partially entered COVID with just one region, realized to do much better. I'd like to say something about India. It's doing plus 6%, and it's one of the countries which, with greater delay, was very hard hit by COVID. What struck me and what Teodori said, well, apart from this level of confidence which exists, well, he was cautious and uncertain in saying this. He said you needed caution and there are uncertainties. And what Professor Bernabé has just said is absolutely true. There's a structural issue on the one hand, and probably there's a slight speculation on the other. And we'll go into this later. The banking system. In my opinion, objectively speaking, in the course of this crisis, the banking sector was a partner in the solution and not part of the problem. Many say this, not just me, thanks to state guarantees, and we see this with peace of mind, the real economy received funding and opportunities to cash in, to increase working capital, and to do maintenance. And I think that the amounts made available were sufficient. Today we're speaking of putting an end to the moratorium, but I am not amongst the pessimists. We see that one company in a total of 5 has asked for further postponement, and in the amortizing starting from the 1st of July onwards, the percentage of difficulties is below 5%. So at the moment, there are no possible cliff effects. The semester of 2022 will lead to development of some complex situations, but I don't think that it's going to happen quickly. Certainly, as a bank, we have a responsibility. We have to see how some crises can be reversible and help the companies in this crisis. We have to try to single out where these crises cannot be solved, and so we have to avoid helping them because then they would do dumping activities on the system and worsen the conditions for all. A further comment on sustainability. Reading Federacciai's report yesterday, it says that 80% of plants are now electrified. So I believe that a major task has been carried out. Perhaps there's a sense of belonging to a lesser country. Many things have been done, and we have to do things in those industries where there's a high level of energy consumption and not the opposite. When a sector like yours is already 80% electrified, I think that a lot of ground has been covered. Perhaps you should be brave enough to say this. It's obvious that public opinion dwells much more on the question of Acciaierie d'Italia and so on. But I believe that this is a sector which should come out of this situation, perhaps working in the shadows, trying to be very low profile and not describing what has been done in these past years. One of the 135 companies present told me, and then we'll speak of production areas and supply planes. 38 of these come from Brescia, and so even just listening to the accents in Italian, you can see that Brescia is very much present. They were speaking of a new patent they have where they mix methane and electricity, which can be compensated up to 100% in both cases with a certain variability. I think that there is a lot of research, a lot of innovation, a lot of possibility, and so we should communicate this. Thank you, Stefano Rossetti. In the survey, we saw that despite the difficulties, investments were present. Indeed, companies invested, and for 2022, they have confirmed a series of investments. Investments in different fields. But as there are 4 major groups and 4 presidents representing companies which are going through a major transformation, I would like to take you to this point. Investments as a challenge. In these 3 days, we've also spoken about paradigm shift, and this brings me to sustainability. What we continue to see, we in siderweb are part of this community, and we are those who take everything which emerges and communicate it also outside of the community, because that is our role. So the topic of communicating sustainability is something which, in the majority of cases, is not carried out properly, but we should at least try to describe this and do some storytelling in a positive way. And in our opinion, in my opinion, and I'd like to know what your opinion is linked to investments in technology, investments in plants, investments in innovation and in new patents. Because steel is changing, because the steel we manufacture continuously changes, but this is because the request from users changes. This morning Fincantieri said we need vessels which are more performing. We need more performing steels to have lighter ships, lighter vessels which can go faster and are lighter. This morning, President Pasini, you've made the announcement of a major investment. I'll start off with you, and then. So what announcement did you make this moment? Otherwise, we'll have to wait until tomorrow to read it on the papers. Yes, but before I speak what I announced this morning, I wanted to dwell on something you were saying as far as communication is concerned. the Italian steel industry, in 85% of cases, is EAF. This means that we are a sustainable steel industry. We are part of the real circular economy. There is no steel industry in Europe which can boast 85% of recovery of iron scrap. Moreover, EAF has been capable in the last few years of recovering from wastes, scraps, and plastic scrap too. When you speak of communication, well, we often look at the steel industry, not from the inside, but those who look at us from outside, as if Taranto were the example of what the steel industry is in Italy. Now, I don't want to speak about what happened in Taranto, but Taranto is not Italy's steel industry. It's just part of it. But 85% of the steel activities in Italy are more than sustainable, and we have to say this out loud. It's true. We are absolutely sustainable. Unfortunately, we import 1/3 of our scrap from outside, and we consume an enormous amount of energy. And where does this energy come from? It comes from gas, and as we've recently heard, the prices of gas have really gone up, and so we're fighting with external factors too. Now, if we want to reach 2030 and have minus 55% of emissions, we have to be very clear that if this is the goal which Europe has given us, the European Commission, then the European Commission must also be in the condition to bring us to 2030 in a position to be competitive. We must be competitive because till today in Europe for the production of energy, there are incredible differences. In Germany, 37% of its energy still comes from coal. In Poland, 80%. France still has nuclear energy. Now, if the policy aimed at reducing emissions is a European policy, then the energy policy must be a European energy policy. If this is not the case, we will lose competitiveness in the next 10 years. And we have to say this out loud. Someone said yesterday, our president, Banzato, said this. So we also have a CO2 problem. CO2s will cost more because, obviously, if you head towards decarbonization, there will also be the problem of CO2. But we have to also stop thinking of the steel industry as something bad and ugly and dirty. And I'm referring to industries which have nothing to do whatsoever with sustainability. But they continue to speak of sustainability, even if they have no idea where they have to start off from to promote sustainability. We are the real sustainable industry in Italy. Let me go back to what I announced this morning. This morning we announced an objective we have as an Italian group, because in this investment we want to carry out it mainly in Italy. For the next 5 years, we want to have roughly 20% of our energy coming from renewable sources, and an investment of 100 million euros in photovoltaic to have 120 megawatts available. But we know that in the next few years we have to endow ourselves with alternative sources of energy, and we are looking at this as our next objective. It's not given for granted we will succeed. It's not that easy to create photovoltaic parks in Italy. It wasn't easy to do gasifiers either, and we're paying for the consequence for this. But we fixed ourselves this objective, and still today we don't know if we're going to manage. But I wanted to say this because this is indeed one of the important things for us producers and for the steel industry. President Marcegaglia, for green development activities, you're part of an important consortium, and you're in a stage you were reminding us of in an interview on Il Sole 24 Ore of new horizons. The Terni bet has been solved, and now you have a series of projects you're implementing. Yes, It's not that we must, we want, because without Terni, we will invoice 7.5 billion stainless steel with positive results. Stainless steel, which represents a further area for growth this year without Terni, will do better in terms of growth of volumes compared to the rest of the group, and in terms of performance even better. So Terni, to be clear, was, and I say this and I'm not happy in saying this because we wanted to win and we didn't, but here we lost a further opportunity. We're looking at various other opportunities, both for carbon steel, flat and tubes, but also for stainless steel. These are projects which were drawn up in the past and in various parts of the supply chain. Do excuse me if I'm not more specific, because we are assessing some of these, and these are also potentially for the processing stage. We put these on standby because we couldn't do everything at once. I wanted to say that our business model, aside from Terni, is extremely solid and very positive. Our investments are one of the characteristics of our group. Let me give you just a couple of numbers. On average, we have carried out investments which are more limited, only 50 to 60 million per year. In the COVID year, we reached 90 million. And I confirm that, as many other colleagues, in 2020 we did not slow down. Indeed, the opposite, we accelerated. And in 2021, in the first 6 months, we are now at 68 million, nearly double. And so we are speaking of an investment for greater efficiency, energy savings, sustainability, the environment in general. And of course, digitalization, innovation, and so on. Speaking of investments which are a little more ordinary, although there are many CAPEX expenditures which are not that ordinary in these numbers, the investment you were referring to is to H2 Green Steel, where amongst the 20 investors, first level investment, the A series investments, which enjoy some benefits. I'm part of the supervisory board. H2 Green Steel is a project of a mini mill for 2.5 million tons, expandable to 5 million, which will start being built in the first months of 22. It's the initiative of a series of investors, mainly not linked to the steel industry and supply chain. This is interesting, which associates in the north of Sweden using rather unique conditions, technology, that of a modern mini mill for steel production with an electric service, continuous casting, and an on-line rolling mill, with a direct reduction plant totally fueled by hydrogen. A hydrolyzer of 800 mega, which will be fueled exclusively through renewable energies, where Sweden has an excess production. Lucky Sweden. I'm speaking of wind and sun, using pellets, which are available in some mines in the northern part of Sweden. And it's very interesting, even for non-steel operators in the first and second level. Ours is not just the role of investor and a presence on the board. It's also an industrial partnership, because we were invited as trading partners in the offtake of an important share of production, both for the first and second step. And we can therefore do reprocessing downstream with reference to Southern Europe. If this model can be copied in the future elsewhere, I don't know. In Italy, for example, I don't know. Probably it'll take some time. We'll need some different conditions. We'll need a technological breakthrough to do this. But in the meantime, we've decided to take part in this important project, and we have a role to play in the downstream supply chain. And this is a tangible sign of how attentive we are to sustainability, even if we are an investor which is non-steel today. President Gozzi, today you are implementing a very important investment which changes the structure at a European level of the entire market in Sarzino. This for extruded products and also for the warming furnace for the use of hydrogen. Apart from the rolling mill, I'd like you to tell us how such an investment, looking to the future, can change part of the market, but not just in terms of the production you will set up, but because it will also create a new paradigm. On the basis of a manual for young explorers, in the middle of the pandemic, we decided to launch such an important investment for a total of 200 million euros to build a rolling mill for beams for the building industry, which will be the most modern in Europe, with a production up to 750,000 tons. Which are the innovative elements of this investment? First of all, we are going to exploit what Ross said yesterday when he said that data is going to be the raw material of the future. In our rolling mill, we have more than 10,000 IoT sensors to fuel with information, a system which is increasingly automated and intelligent for rolling activities, where quantities, calibers and weights are systematically analyzed and corrected by machinery. So this digitalization element is certainly a paradigm shift. We're not the first. Pittini in Verona set up a new rolling mill where there are 10,000 sensors for rods, and we also have another producer who has launched a very modern mill too. So we are in the wake of this digitalization, introducing very intelligent systems. And this was for wire rod. And then we are thinking of creating a rolling mill totally fueled by alternative energy sources. It's got a PPA system and a Piedmontese wind energy supply, but we needed a special Duferco contract in order to be able to fund this investment. So we launched this first steel PPA ourselves, and then we went to our friends and colleagues to offer PPA, and I must say that 2 or 3 companies followed us. Acciaieria Venete, I think I can say this, or Di Martin, they did a great deal because they bought electricity from us for 7, 8, 10 years at 57 euros. And I think that today, it's easy to say this. In 2020, the energy manager would call me saying, "What? You sold at 57.40." And so I said, "Don't worry, look to the future, be patient, you'll see that you will not be sorry." The third thing we're really committed to is, as Beppe Pasini said, a steel industry with EAFs which are totally decarbonized, at least for our number one objective. The production of steel is totally decarbonized, but we also have the rewarming furnaces which are fueled with methane gas, and we have to see what we can do to reduce this Scope 1. This is a synergy which exists. It all comes from the Po River Plain, because our mills are indicated because we fuel this with agriculture and cattle rearing. And you need biodigesters to produce this. And we are extraordinary clients for biogas. So the major rewarming furnace of the new rolling mill, which we will introduce in January. Bendotti yesterday was telling me that the rewarming furnace is ready and we can go and see it. We have 1 year and a few months before we see the machine actually working to be in total compliance with the objective of the European Union for 2030 for SCOP1 from the pre-warming furnace. It's enough to sign 6 contracts with biodigesters in the Po River Plain, which use their biogas to produce a certain amount of megawatts if they don't have to pour everything into the pipeline of Snam. Not 60 contracts, but just 6. If we manage to achieve this on the threshold of 2030, we will manage to have a steel mill and a rolling mill for 1 million tons, which is totally decarbonized. And this is so exciting. It's very close. We're not thinking of faraway things. We're trying to prepare. I believe that these 3 elements, these sensors, the PPA, and the prospect of biogas for a pre-warming furnace will change the paradigm. It will allow us to be an example of what it means to create a steel industry capable of surviving to the changes of challenges of sustainability. And then I totally agree with Bernabé. Europe, for once, or extremist currents in Europe, which unfortunately are present within amongst the officials of the European Union, have tackled the topic of gas making mistakes. They didn't tackle it properly. Gas is an energy source which can be used to doing decarbonization, because there are technologies like the carbon capture, utilization and storage, which allows turbo gas to work and to capture the CO2 emitted. For what reason mustn't we develop this technology? As I'm obsessive on this, after having read the Boston study, we signed a framework agreement of the 7 federations of Artuabate with the ENI and SNAM to work in the Po River Plain on 3 technological axes: carbon capture, because, for example, there are some processes which don't have the stroke of good luck of being decarbonized like steel. You can't electrify cement, ceramics only partially. And so think of which implicit synergy exists between the cement producers of the Po River Plain and the ceramics producers and our carbon capture. Biogas, because there's issue of transport and infrastructure, and then hydrogen. SNAM is working a lot on how to use its tubes, which is its pipelines, which is its real asset. So get gas to pass through these pipelines first, and the hydrogen gas later could make Italy a record-breaking country. An example of how you can do decarbonization, or a real decarbonization of industries, not simply making standards stricter, which doesn't lead to anything, but using companies, technologies, and the assets we're strongest in to give a real answer to decarbonization processes. Thank you, Professor.
Chairman Bernabé, you are taking care as Acciaierie d'Italia with taking care of an epoch-making project. Nobody has succeeded in changing the fortunes and turning around the fortunes of Acciaierie d'Italia. So we would like to hear from you what you think you should be doing in order to change around the fortunes of the steelworks in Taranto? That being the first question. Then, second question, this increase in energy prices, as you correctly said, in China, new provisions have been passed, and again, things are different here. So any project that is envisaged for the future has to go hand in hand with very sustainable costs. So what do you make of that? What is your view on that? As I said, I'm pretty new to the steel sector and certainly very new to the Italian steel production sector. None of course, of the none of the initiatives that were taken and survived the doldrums of the Ilva steelworks. The company was put under external management for 3 different times, so there was a change of ownership, several changes of ownership over the last few years. So maybe it was like trying to manage a startup company with a very large size. So again, this is a clear indication of the capacity and the resilience in Italy. So this company has managed to survive and weather the storm. And I haven't even mentioned all the court proceedings and all the other problems, legal problems that Acciaierie d'Italia had experienced. So all the technicians, all the managers, they're all coming back. They're all coming back. They're all taking care now of the this new future for the Acciaierie d'Italia with great enthusiasm. So this tells a lot about the resilience that we have in Italy. Acciaierie d'Italia, they have to find the right strike balance between different needs. On the one hand, you have environmental sustainability. So this is, of course, a going concern for the company. And then we have economic sustainability. Of course, when it comes to a publicly owned company, you have to avoid that history repeats itself. And then, of course, you need to make sure that all the economic, environmental, and social aspects go hand in hand. As I was saying earlier on, you have to strike the right balance. The whole company has been struggling a lot because of the financial crisis, because of all the issues that have involved all the steel-making industry over the last few years. So, again, we now have to fully support the recovery procedure of Acciaierie d'Italia. As we heard earlier on, Ilva and Acciaierie d'Italia, they do not represent steel made in Italy. Made in Italy still is something different. And I'm thinking about mini mills and electrification. This is where Italy derived a very strong competitive edge. But still, the Acciaierie Italiane is an important piece within this puzzle. So I'm perfectly aware of the fact that the choices that we have to make are part and parcel of a broader context of again, when we talk about steel, we don't have a plan we can refer to. Everybody in the steel industry in Italy, everybody within this community would have to take part in that. We have to share a common vision for our future, and all that has to be based on the entrepreneurial strength of the steel-making industry. So we know where we want to go. And as Antonio Gozzi said, we know that hydrogen and sustainability are the ultimate goal for us. So once we get there, we will see how compatible all these goals are. So we have to bear in mind that the company as such had to go to great length in order to recover its full dynamism, in order to go back to strategic planning, and in order to go back to successful operations, given that the company has basically been abandoned for a specific period of time. And as I said, this is an epoch-making, epoch-changing process here. So the last thing to do here is to react to hastily, because being in a hurry here wouldn't really help. We have survived 10 years of a tragic situation. The Acciaierie d'Italia had to go through, and now I think that we have the time to take a decision which is based on consensus in Italy within the steel making industry. So I think that this should be the guiding principle for our industrial plan. There's something else that I would like to add. We should also look abroad. If you're talking about sustainability, and as Mr. Gozzi was pointing out earlier on, I think there's still a lot to do in order to achieve a circular economy, in order to have sustainable gas, in order to foster the gasification process. So there's still leeway for renewable resources. And please bear in mind that Italy was the country that then invented the gas pipeline from Russia, and they now cater to 40% of our gas demand. So we started ahead of time. We created the Trans-Mediterranean gas pipe, and we also built the gas pipe that goes through the Black Sea. And if you produce steel, you know what sort of steel was necessary in order to withstand the pressure. Corrosion being one of the main issues. So this idea of being able to look abroad to see what is happening in Africa, and again, renewable resources are of paramount importance. This was clearly proven at Eni and in many other companies. So if you're brave enough, again, you can make brave choices. Mr. Rossetti, we talked about investment, we talked about extraordinary financial operations, we talked about capital investment. So what is the role of a bank within this context? our system is still bank-driven, so basically banks have a very important role to play as part of extraordinary financial operations. And we shall not forget that BPER made a dimensional jump by more than 40%, so a 40% size increase was recorded last year in terms of the number of bank branches. So we stand ready to fully embrace all the opportunities that this growth has provided us with. We now have corporate investment banking section that takes care of all alternative credit facilities. Now, going back to the survey results illustrated by Professor Teodori, I think that we can start thinking along the lines about the issuance of bonds, mini bonds, or product financing opportunities. So I think that banks can certainly support companies. As we have heard in all the presentations today, of course, the willingness to embrace the environmental transition and the green transition is there. So again, our presence here today is proof of that. So we stand ready to seize the opportunities that this country now has. So we do represent this local territory, and this is why we are present at local level throughout the Italian country. You know all of us very well, Stefano Cuno and all the other main managers. So we really wanted to fully support this industrial sector. Thank you. Thank you very much. I think we can to reply to one last question, and please provide a short answer because then we will move on with the award ceremony. So one just quick answer, and I will start with Vice Director Rossetti. Please stick to 20 seconds. What is your now sentiment? What is your take-home message, basically, after hearing this presentation, after listening to these presentations at this very nice and complicated 2021 Made in Steel edition? Well, in a nutshell, I could say digitization. We didn't talk too much about digitization. That's a pity. It would have been nice to talk about that at a greater length. And then capacity to invest, and therefore ability to foster ecological transition. And last but not least, being brave enough to act as real entrepreneurs. This is something that I really see in this sector. Well, I must say I was really glad to be able to take part in Made in Steel and siderweb. So I came here to listen first and foremost. And what I really appreciated of this round table today is that great attention is attached to investments, and there's great determination to make investments. So I really think that our country is so much better than what has been written in the newspapers every day. So I really think that our Prime Minister Mario Draghi is really doing the right thing, because he's just sticking to the plan, and he's just leading the country towards the achievement of specific objectives. Mr. Gozzi? Well, I tend to exchange views with many of us, and the key to this renaissance, to this magic situation we find ourselves in, is Mr. Mario Draghi and his cabinet. We come from a period where entrepreneurs had the impression they were not given attention to, and again, the working method of the government is very much in line with the working method of an entrepreneur. So I think that that's the key. Economic theory tells us that psychological expectations are a driving force. Without any expectations, you can't generate any positive sentiment. So this 3-day conference was very much based on trust, and this is something you really perceive here. So that's an important asset which we need to safeguard and preserve. Chairman Marcegaglia. Now, going back to again our industry, to the entire industry, I would say strategic positioning, trust and commitment. So we need to have a strategic approach. 2020 was a very difficult year, and there we fully understood how complex it was to take up all the challenges in 2020 and in 2021. So our industry is of strategic importance for the country as a whole. And then I mentioned trust. You can simply touch it with your hands. So if you have renewed trust in your future, it means that you're really willing to change things. And then I also mentioned commitment. There are great challenges looming on the horizon. We need to be able to take them up, and we are now in a good position to do so. And we have to do so in a very determined fashion. Chairman Pasini, again, 2020 was a very difficult year. 2021, as somebody said earlier on, will be a unique year. Enzo Ferrari, when he was asked what was the best win in your life, he always said, well, the next one. So I do hope that in 2023 we will be here again to celebrate another great victory for the steel industry. Thank you. Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure. It was a pleasure to have you here as guests. Thank you very much. Kindly ask you to take your seats among the audience, and again, we still have the last 15 minutes, the very last mile of this 2021 edition of Made in Steel. As I was saying earlier on, when I first introduced this award ceremony earlier on, we were asked by the AIM, by the Italian Association of Steel Producing Companies and of Centro Inox, to have this award ceremony as part of this meeting. We were immediately delighted, and we immediately said, yes, of course. So we will now be awarding the Stainless Steel Medal entitled to Gabriele Di Caprio and the Steel Medal entitled to Federico Giolitti. I kindly ask Mr. Federico Manzolai, the chairman of AAM, to join me on stage, Mr. Paolo Cappelli, Mr. Paolo Viganò as representative of Centro Inox, and Chairman Morandi, please join us here on stage. And Chairman Mazzarelli, you now have 3 minutes to tell us more about these medals, why they have been created, and why you have decided to award them here during today's meeting.
Less than 3 minutes actually, because we're a little late. I wanted to say the following. for AIM, this is an important year because it's our 75th anniversary. 75th anniversary. We started our activity in 1946. Usually you do important things when these events take place. And we said, we can't really do much because we still have COVID restrictions for organizing things. But then we said, let's look what we've done so far. So we said, let's do something which recognizes the merits in the steel industry. And in this case, we concentrated on two topics. Stainless steel, which is the new steel. It's only 100 years old, a little more than that. It has a great history. It developed enormously in the last decades. And with this, we would like to remember Gabriele Di Caprio, who is a professor and engineer, someone who truly devoted his life to the promotion of stainless steel. We mustn't forget that behind the success of a product, there is always the work done by someone. I am convinced that Di Caprio has done a lot. Turning to the other field, that of steel in a more general sense, we spoke of Federico Giolitti. Federico Giolitti is a man who probably more than 100 years ago doesn't remind people of much if you don't operate in the field of steel. But he was someone who, as he came from an important family, his father was the famous Giolitti politician. He was a very capable man. He went to study in Germany. He went to the United States. And he developed his talents also thanks to the contacts he's had with he had internationally. And Federico Giolitti is the person who founded the field of thermal treatments, especially thermal treatments called cementation, intruliation, and the field of mechanics and the automotive industry use this because without these technologies, our cars after 10,000 kilometers would have to change their gears. And so we decided to give a prize, this award, to someone who comes also from a historic field of steel, because I think that it's one of the family-run companies with the greatest tradition in Italy. And so I think that this acts as a bridge, a secular bridge between Federico Giolitti and Alessandro Barzato. I now give the floor to the others because I promised to be brief. So the President has just revealed part of the secret of this afternoon session. I now give the floor to Paolo Viganò to present the motivation, this is still a secret, of the Di Caprio Medal. Thank you very much. Just a couple of words on the medal. In 2010, the steering committee of AIM, to honor the memory of Gabriele Di Caprio, decided to set up, together with Centro Inox, the stainless steel medal entitled with his name to a metalworking entrepreneur who has been a scholar and entrepreneur in the field of stainless steel and has always achieved great performance. The award receiver has been working in stainless steel for 38 years, and after technical and scientific training as a young man, he completed his knowledge in the field of stainless steel metal products for steels and studying the text of Mr. DiCaprio. He developed responsibility in the trading field with the most important stainless steel manufacturers in Italy, and he's the mill sale director in Italy. In 2016, he became part of the steering committee of the Inox Center, and in 2018, he became chairman with a renewal of his mandate in 2022, which was a particularly complicated year. From his first year of chairmanship, his commitment, his capacity relating with the staff of the association, his innovative spirit, his enthusiasm, and constant stimulus in searching for new initiatives in the field and for development have marked his mandate, absolutely respecting the principles of the association, which wants the Centro Inox to be the reference point for the development of special and stainless steel products. It is with pleasure that I give this medal to Mr. Massimo Zoppini. Thank you. I must say I'm very grateful for this unexpected award. I wish to thank Mr. Marzorati, Mr. Viganò. Everything has already been said, so I have nothing more to add. And so thank you. An applause, please. And now I give the floor to Carlo Mappelli, who has the duty and honor to officially announce the winner of the award, the awarding of the medal Giolitti. This doesn't happen periodically. The last medal was conferred 12 years ago in 2009 to Giuseppe Pasini, who is here amongst us. And just a couple of words. Federico Giolitti, to Federico Giolitti, we dedicated this medal of AIM because he was the merging point between the chemical professor in Rome and then Turin. And he was continuing the wake of another great Turin professor in metal and mines, Quintino Sella, whom we remember for other reasons. And we have the very great pleasure and honor of having singled out someone new to whom award this medal. And AIM, after 12 years, has analyzed him. I'm speaking of Alessandro Banzato. Please come to the podium. Thank you. Well, thank you. On my behalf, thank you, Mr. Mazzolari. Thank you to AIM, to the steering committee. Thank you to my friend Mappelli. Thank you for your kind words. I must say that this medal should be shared with all the men and women who work in Acciaierie Venete, because I'm just the most recent expression of their work. And I'd like to share this with my father, who couldn't be here, but someone who decided to shift production of Acciaierie Venete towards high quality steel. So thank you to you all for this award. So we've truly reached the final part. Please stay here, Mr. President, President Morandi, President Banzato. I'd like to ask the same question I asked our incredible panel. Let us conclude this Made in Steel. What was made in steel? What feeling do you have, and what will you take home? Yesterday we were speaking with Manuel. He was telling me that the number of visitors and of exhibitors was equals to that of the 2019 edition in terms of presence. I believe that this bears witness to the fact that the Italian steel industry has managed to exit the difficult year of 2020 and how the future offers hope. As Beppe said, let us hope we'll meet in 2023, speaking of even more ambitious goals. This is what we'd like to share with you all. Manuel? Well, we have an aphorism which guides our choices. I put it on the siderweb industrial plan, on piani d'acciaio, on our documents. If you want to, want to do something big, attach your yoke, the yoke of your plow to a star. Well, the stars have brought us into a given world, but now we have the most difficult part, execution. So we have to be able to implement with our hard work every day, the intuition, the ideas we've had in these days. So the key word is cooperation. Let us be confident. Instead of building walls, let us build bridges within our companies, within our associations. Let us put our heart in this, because our companies, our economy, our country really needs this new vision. Thank you very much, and we will meet in 2023. I too, on behalf of the team, I'm a little touched on behalf of the siderweb team. Thank you very much indeed. How could we conclude this 2021 edition? We've spoken of renaissance, we've spoken of beauty, we've spoken of courage, of challenge, of vision, and we didn't have the words to describe all this. And so we decided that in the 700th anniversary of Dante, the only voice which could encourage us and remind us that we have been made for great tasks and that we are not frightened, and that challenge is Ulysses' challenge. I leave you with the last sentence of Canto 26, interpreted by Luciano Bertoli for us all. See you again in 2023. Oh, brothers, I began. Woe to the West, through perils without number. Now we have reached to this, the short remaining watch, that yet our senses have to wake. Refuse not proof of the unpeopled world, following the track of Phoebus. Call to mind from whence ye sprang. You were not formed to live the life of brutes, but virtue to pursue, and knowledge high. With these few words, I sharpened for the voyage the mind of my associates, that I then could scarcely have withheld them. To the dawn our poop returned, and for the witless flight made our oars wings, still gaining on the left. Each star of the other pole night now beheld, and ours so low that from the ocean floor it rose not. 5 times re-illumined, as oft vanished the light from underneath the moon, since the deep way we'd entered, when from far appeared a mountain dim, loftiest methoughts of all I e'er beheld. Joy seized us straight, but soon to mourning changed. From the new land, everything hit the wood of our first canto. 3 times this happened with all the water, and with the 4th wave, the poop was lifted, and we dived downwards. And in the waters, the sea, in the end, loomed above us and closed.
This is what AIC has been doing since 1975. Automazione Industriale Capitano designs, manufactures and commissions turnkey automation plants worldwide. For decades, we've been moved by an unchanging passion that drives us to innovate constantly, to always provide our customers with the best available solution. Their experience is all in your hands. Capitano, tailored automation.
trovata appunto un anno fa, quando è successo il tutto, a dover chiudere l'attività, e dal di lì ho cominciato a tirare fuori il meglio di quello che stava succedendo.